My dad had tears in his eyes when he stood up at my brother's engagement party and called him our greatest success. The whole room raised their glasses, 40 people, cheering. And I sat at the back table in my only nice dress, wondering if a single person in that room knew what I actually did for a living. They didn't. My family had made sure of that. For 15 years, my father had told anyone who'd listen that his son was a doctor, and his daughter was, well, he usually changed the subject. What happened over the next 90 seconds rewrote everything. But I need to take you back to the beginning. I'm Myra, 33, and I'm a trauma surgeon at one of the biggest hospitals in Ohio. My parents spent $180,000 putting my brother through medical school and told me, to my face, that a woman's place is with her husband. If you've ever been overlooked because someone decided your dreams weren't worth the investment, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I grew up in a one-story house outside Dayton, Ohio. White siding, chain-link fence, a shed out back where my dad kept his plumbing tools. Frank Mercer ran his own one-man operation, Mercer Plumbing and Drain. He fixed pipes all over Montgomery County, came home smelling like copper and PVC cement, and sat in his recliner every night with a Budweiser and the local news. He was proud of that business. Proud he'd kept a roof over our heads without a college degree. My mom, Janet, kept the house running like a quiet machine. Meals at 6, church on Sundays. She ironed Frank's work shirts even though he got them dirty by 7 in the morning. If you asked her opinion on anything, she'd tilt her head toward my dad and say, "Your father knows best." My brother Kyle was 2 years older than me. Average student. Good at football. Fine at math. He was the kind of kid adults called solid. Nobody called him exceptional, but nobody needed to. He was the sun. I was the one who stayed up past bedtime with a flashlight and the World Book Encyclopedia. I caught frogs in the drainage ditch behind the elementary school, took apart the kitchen clock to see how the gears worked, and asked my science teacher so many questions she started lending me her own textbooks. In 7th grade, I scored highest in the school on the state science exam. I brought the certificate home, buzzing. My dad looked at it for maybe 3 seconds. "Good," he said. "Now go help your mother set the table." That same semester, Kyle got a B- in algebra. Dad pinned it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a wrench. The summer I turned 18, I graduated high school as valedictorian. 4.0 GPA. 3 acceptance letters sat on my desk, University of Cincinnati, Ohio State, and a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania that offered partial aid. That same summer, Kyle got accepted into the pre-med program at Ohio State. One night in July, Dad called us both to the kitchen table. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him with numbers written in pencil. Mom sat beside him with her hands in her lap. "Here's what we're going to do," Dad said. He'd talked to the bank. He was refinancing the house and pulling from his retirement account, the one he'd been building for 22 years at the union before going solo. Every dollar was going toward Kyle's education. 4 years of undergraduate, then 4 years of medical school. $180,000 total. "This family is going to have a doctor," he said, and he looked at Kyle the way some men look at a new truck they've been saving for. I waited. Then I asked, "What about me? I got accepted to 3 schools." Dad didn't pause. He didn't flinch. He looked at me with what I think he believed was genuine kindness. "Myra, honey, a woman's place is with her husband. You don't need degrees. You need a good man who can provide." The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. I looked at my mother. She was nodding. Slowly, automatically, the way she nodded at everything my father said. Kyle stared at his plate. He didn't argue. He didn't say a word. I said, "I had a 4.0, Dad." He said, "And your mother had a 3.8. Look at her. She's happy." My mother's fork hand tightened. Just for a second. Then it released. She said nothing. I went upstairs. I didn't slam my door. I sat at my desk and looked at the 3 acceptance letters, fanned out like a hand of cards I'd been told I couldn't play. I stayed up until 2 in the morning, doing math on a napkin. Tuition at the community college in town, $2,400 a semester. I had $1,100 in savings from babysitting. I needed $1,300 more, plus rent, plus food, plus books. The next morning, I came down before Dad left for work. He was pouring coffee. "I'll figure it out on my own," I said. He chuckled. Not mean, just genuinely amused. "With what money, sweetheart?" "I'll work." He shook his head. "We can only invest in one future. Kyle's going to be a doctor. That's the family's ticket." I looked at him. "Then I'll invest in my own." He didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He just picked up his coffee and walked out to the truck. I think he gave me 3 months before I'd come back asking for help. Within a week, I had 3 jobs. 5 a.m. at Grater's Bakery on Far Hills Avenue, hauling flour bags and rolling dough before the sun came up. 9 to 5 as a receptionist at a dental office on Wilmington Pike, answering phones and filing insurance claims between anatomy flashcards. 6 to 11 as a waitress at a diner off Route 35, pouring coffee for truckers and bussing tables until my feet went numb. I wrote my schedule on an index card and taped it inside my closet door. 3 columns, 3 jobs, 3 hourly wages. At the bottom, I wrote, Community College Fall Semester, $2,400. I moved out of my parents' house that same week. Found a studio apartment, $450 a month, 15 minutes from campus. Dad didn't try to stop me. He figured reality would. My first year at Sinclair Community College, I took 15 credits a semester on the pre-med track while working 55 hours a week across 3 jobs. I learned to study in the cracks, flashcards in my apron pocket at the diner, a biology textbook propped behind the phone at the dental office, organic chemistry notes taped to the dashboard of my car for red lights. I slept about 4.5 hours a night, sometimes 5 if I skipped breakfast. My hands smelled like flour in the morning, latex in the afternoon, and fryer grease at night. I kept a 4.0. My chemistry professor, a man named Dr. Albrecht who wore the same brown cardigan every Monday, stopped me after class one day. "You're the best student I've had in 12 years at this college," he said. "Why are you here instead of a university?" I told him I was working on that. I called my mother once that semester. It was a Sunday evening. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "How are you, honey?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm taking organic chemistry." There was a pause. The kind of pause where someone chooses which sentence to load next. "Your brother got an A in anatomy," she said. I waited for her to ask about my classes. She didn't. I waited for her to ask if I was eating enough or sleeping enough or whether I was okay. She didn't do that either. "That's great for Kyle," I said. "Tell him I said congratulations." She said she would. Then she said she had to go because dinner was getting cold. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed in my studio apartment that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner. That was the last time I called home first. Halfway through my 2nd year, I applied to transfer to the University of Cincinnati's pre-med program. I got in with a partial scholarship based on academic merit, $3,000 a year, which covered about 1/3 of tuition. I'd saved enough from the 3 jobs to cover the rest of the first semester and planned to keep working 2 jobs in Cincinnati. I packed my studio apartment into the back of my 12-year-old Honda Civic and drove 2 hours north. New city, new apartment. Smaller, on the 3rd floor, above a laundromat that ran until midnight. I started classes the following Monday. That Thanksgiving, I wasn't invited home. I found out later from a cousin's Facebook post that the whole family gathered at my parents' house. Turkey, sweet potatoes, the good china. Kyle flew in from Columbus, where he was in his 2nd year of med school. In the photo, he was sitting at the head of the table with Dad on one side and Mom on the other. Everybody was smiling. Aunt Helen had written in the comments, "So proud of our future doctor." My grandmother, Dad's mother Ruth, sent me a separate message. "Where were you today?" I told her I was studying. She sent back a heart emoji. She was 75 and had just figured out how to use them. I ate Thanksgiving dinner alone in my apartment. Kraft mac and cheese, the kind that comes in the blue box. I ate it standing at the counter with my organic chemistry textbook open beside me because I had an exam on Monday, and the Krebs cycle doesn't care about holidays. Meanwhile, Kyle was starting to struggle. He hadn't told anyone, but his first attempt at the USMLE Step 1 didn't go well. He retook it and barely passed. The family never heard about that. The following Christmas, I went home. Not for my parents, for Grandma Ruth. She'd asked me directly, and I couldn't say no to a woman who remembered my birthday when my own parents forgot. The house was packed. Aunts, uncles, cousins, church friends. The tree had new ornaments. Kyle's med school class photo was framed on the mantel, next to his high school senior portrait. There were no photos of me anywhere in the living room. During dinner, Dad held court the way he always did, telling stories, cracking his one good joke about the backed-up toilet at the VFW. Kyle sat beside him, comfortable, well-fed, his tuition paid through next spring. Aunt Helen's daughter-in-law, a woman I barely knew, turned to me with a polite smile. "So, Myra, what are you up to these days?" Before I could open my mouth, Dad's voice cut across the table. "She's keeping busy, working a few little jobs. You know how it is. She'll settle down when she meets the right guy." The table nodded. Forks returned to plates. Nobody followed up. I was 20 years old, carrying a 3.97 GPA in pre-med at the University of Cincinnati, and my father had just introduced me to the family as a girl waiting for a husband. I cut my ham and said nothing. After dinner, I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Grandma Ruth came in, moving slowly, one hand on the counter for balance. She stood beside me and spoke quietly. "Your grandpa did the same thing to your Aunt Lorraine. She proved him wrong." She paused. "You will too." She patted my arm and shuffled back to the living room. Ruth was the only person in that house who knew I was in college. She never told a soul. That was the deal between us. 2 years later, I graduated from the University of Cincinnati summa cum laude, top 1% of the pre-med program. My GPA was 3.98. I had published a research paper with my mentor, Dr. Patricia Holden, a biochemistry professor who'd spotted me in her lecture hall sophomore year and decided I was worth her time. She was the first person in my academic life who treated my ambition like it belonged to me. Dr. Holden wrote my medical school recommendation letter. She told me later it was the one she was most proud of in 600 letters. I applied to Ohio State College of Medicine, the same school that had cashed my father's $180,000 for Kyle. I got in. Full scholarship. Academic merit. The acceptance packet came in a thick white envelope with the scarlet O in the corner. I held it in my apartment kitchen, standing in a square of morning light, and read it twice. I almost called my mother. I picked up my phone, scrolled to her name, and stopped. I put the phone down. She'd find out when she was ready to ask. Graduation day. May. Clear sky. 2,000 people in the arena. I walked across the stage, shook the dean's hand, and received my diploma. The announcer said my name and my honors. In the crowd, there was no one from my family. No Frank, no Janet, no Kyle. But Dr. Holden was there. She'd driven 2 hours from Cincinnati. She stood up in the middle section and clapped with both hands above her head. I saw her from the stage. I nodded. That was enough. Afterward, I walked to my car alone, holding the diploma in its leather case. I sat behind the wheel, looked at it, started the engine, drove to med school orientation the next week. My father spent $180,000 to make my brother a doctor. My scholarship letter came with a single line at the bottom. Full tuition, awarded on academic merit. I didn't frame it. I folded it into my wallet and carried it every day, not as a trophy, but as proof that the investment my father refused to make, someone else made on the strength of my transcript alone. If this story is hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button. It gets heavier from here. Medical school at Ohio State was a different kind of hard. Not the financial kind. The scholarship covered tuition, and I took out modest loans for living expenses. This was the kind of hard that tested whether you could hold a retractor for 4 hours without your hand shaking, whether you could memorize every branch of the brachial plexus and recall it at 2 in the morning during a practical exam, whether you could stand in a cadaver lab on your first day and not flinch. I didn't flinch. I was 26, older than most of my cohort by 4 years. They'd come straight from undergrad, funded by parents or trust accounts or a combination of both. I was the one who still carried flour dust in the seams of her backpack from the bakery years. I chose the surgery track early. My anatomy professor told me I had the steadiest hands he'd seen in a decade. I didn't know what to do with the compliment, so I just kept cutting. Second year, I walked past the departmental hallway where they displayed photos of distinguished alumni. I looked for Kyle's name on the honor boards, the research awards, the clinical excellence lists. He wasn't on any of them. He'd graduated. He'd gotten his MD. But he hadn't left a mark on any wall in that building. I didn't feel satisfaction when I noticed that. I felt something more like confirmation, that the $180,000 had bought him a degree, not a distinction. I, on the other hand, was starting to leave marks. My surgery rotation evaluations came back with the word exceptional, written in 3 separate attending physicians' notes. I taped nothing to any wall. I just kept going. Kyle graduated from medical school 4 years before I did. He'd barely made it through. The USMLE Step 1, the exam that basically determines your career trajectory. He failed on his first attempt. Retook it and passed with a score that closed every competitive residency door in the country. Surgery, dermatology, orthopedics, all out of reach. He matched into a family medicine residency at a community hospital outside Dayton. 3 years later, he was a general practitioner at a strip mall clinic in Kettering. He saw patients for sinus infections, blood pressure refills, annual physicals, and the occasional sprained wrist. It was honest work. It was perfectly respectable. But it was not what $180,000 was supposed to buy. My father never acknowledged any of this. To him, Kyle was, my son, the doctor. He said it at church. He said it at Rotary Club. He said it to the cashier at the hardware store who didn't ask. Kyle's medical school graduation photo sat above the fireplace mantel in a gold frame, right where my science certificate should have hung 20 years earlier. When neighbor Larry asked Frank what kind of doctor Kyle was, Frank said, "He does surgeries." Kyle did checkups. I was the one who did surgeries. But Frank didn't know that because Frank had stopped asking about me a long time ago. The last photo of me in that house was my high school graduation portrait. After the phone call, the one I'll tell you about, Dad took it down. He put it in a drawer somewhere. Maybe the attic, maybe the garage. My mother might have known where. She never said. The mantel belonged to Kyle now, and the rest of the wall belonged to the version of the family my father had decided to tell. The phone call happened during my second year of med school. I was 28, sitting in my apartment in Columbus, reviewing surgical anatomy slides on my laptop, when Dad's name appeared on my phone screen. He hadn't called in over a year. I answered. His voice was flat. Business tone. No hello. No how are you. Kyle needed money. Residency application fees, interview travel, relocation deposits. It added up. Family supports family, Dad said. We can only invest in one future, and right now he needs a hand. There it was again. The same sentence from the kitchen table, 10 years later, wearing a different coat. I said, "You invested in his future, Dad. Not mine. So invest in his current problem too." He sighed. "Don't be selfish, Myra. You're working your little jobs. Kyle needs—" "I'm in medical school," I said. "On a full scholarship. At the same university you paid for Kyle to attend." The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to hear the ice shift in his glass. "Don't lie to me," he said. "I'm not lying. Ask the registrar. Ask anyone." I hung up. I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to my slides. I expected a call from Mom. A text from Kyle. Something. What I got was silence. Complete, airtight silence. Dad never called Ohio State to verify. He never asked a neighbor or a cousin to check, because checking meant risking the chance that I was telling the truth. And if I was, his entire story about why his daughter didn't deserve an education would collapse. It was easier to believe I was lying. People protect their narratives the way they protect their houses. They'd rather board up the windows than look outside. After that phone call, the family line went dead. 2 weeks of nothing, then a voicemail from my mother. Her voice had that careful, practiced quality, the same tone she used when explaining to church friends why she couldn't host the potluck this year. Myra, I don't know what you told your father, but you've really hurt him. Whatever you're doing out there, I hope you're happy. You're tearing this family apart. I listened to it once, deleted it. A day later, Kyle texted, "Thanks for upsetting Dad. Real mature." Then, a few seconds later, "Also, who told you about my USMLE scores?" I stared at that second text for a long time. Nobody had told me about his scores. I'd looked them up myself on the medical board's verification site. Public record. But the fact that Kyle's first instinct was paranoia told me everything. He knew his record was thin. He knew the investment hadn't paid the dividends Frank advertised, and he was terrified someone might do the math. I didn't respond to any of them. Not the voicemail, not the texts. I set my phone on the nightstand, went to the hospital for my surgical rotation, and spent the next 8 hours learning to tie sutures with one hand. I ate lunch alone in the cafeteria. I studied alone in the library. I went home to an apartment that was clean, functional, and empty. A single photo on the fridge, me and Grandma Ruth at Christmas, the last one we'd spent together. She was the only family I still spoke to. She called every few weeks. "They're angry," she'd say. "But I'm proud of you. Finish what you started, sweetheart." Ruth was 81 by then. She had arthritis in both hands and could barely hold the phone. She held it anyway. I graduated from medical school on a Saturday in May. Bright sun, packed auditorium, the kind of ceremony where families bring flowers and balloons, and someone's grandmother cries happy tears in the third row. My family wasn't there. No flowers, no balloons, no grandmother in the third row. Though Ruth had wanted to come. Her knees wouldn't let her make the drive. She sent a card instead. Inside, in shaky handwriting, Dr. Myra Mercer. I always knew. Dr. Holden came. She drove 2 hours from Cincinnati, wore a blue blazer and her reading glasses on a chain, and sat in the middle section with a clear view of the stage. When the dean called my name, Myra Elizabeth Mercer, Doctor of Medicine, with distinction. She stood up. Not polite clapping, real clapping, hands above her head. Some of my classmates stood too. They knew pieces of my story. The 3 jobs, the community college start, the scholarship. And they'd filled in the gaps with their own imaginations, which were probably kinder than the truth. After the ceremony, Dr. Holden found me in the lobby. She held my shoulders and said, "Now go save some lives, and call me when you scrub in for your first solo surgery." I told her I would. I drove back to my apartment that evening. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, a $15 Merlot from the grocery store. Nothing fancy. I poured 1 glass, sat at my kitchen table, drank it slowly while the sun went down through the window. The apartment was quiet. No one called. No one texted. I finished the glass, washed it, set it upside down on the drying rack, and went to bed. Surgical residency started in 3 weeks. I needed the sleep. I matched into the surgery residency program at Cleveland Clinic. 5 years, 80-hour weeks. The kind of schedule that turns your circadian rhythm into a suggestion and your social life into a rumor. I specialized in trauma surgery, the department that gets the calls nobody else wants at 3 in the morning. Car accidents, stabbings, falls from scaffolding, the full catalog of ways a body can break. My attending told me during my first year that I had the right temperament for it. "You don't panic," she said. "That's half the job." I didn't tell her I'd been trained not to panic in a kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, where showing emotion meant losing. By my 3rd year, I had a reputation. Calm hands, clean decisions, efficient. The nurses on the trauma floor called me the quiet one because I barely spoke in the break room, but gave clear, steady orders when a gurney came crashing through the doors. One night, February. Freezing, black ice everywhere. A young woman came in by helicopter. 28 years old, car versus pickup truck on Route 8. She had a ruptured spleen, a lacerated liver, 4 broken ribs, and a collapsed lung. She was unconscious when they wheeled her in. I scrubbed in at 9:14 p.m. and didn't step out of the operating room until 3:20 in the morning. 6 hours. I stayed until her vitals stabilized, then went to the call room and slept for 40 minutes. Her name was Elise Warren. She was an elementary school teacher from Dayton. She spent 2 weeks in the ICU and 3 months in recovery. By the time she was discharged, I was already on to the next case. I didn't know Elise's story. She didn't know mine, but she asked the nurses who had saved her. They said, Dr. Mercer. Near the end of my 5th year of residency, I needed my original birth certificate for credentialing paperwork at a hospital in Columbus, where I'd been offered an attending position. The original was at my parents' house. I drove to Dayton on a Sunday morning when I knew Frank and Janet would be at the 10:30 service at Grace Lutheran. I still had my old house key. I'd never given it back, and they'd never asked. The house was quiet. Same carpet, same wallpaper, same smell. Coffee grounds and lemon pledge. I went upstairs to the attic access in the hallway ceiling and pulled down the folding ladder. The attic was hot and dusty, packed with boxes labeled in my mother's handwriting. I found the one marked Important Documents and opened it. My birth certificate was on top. But underneath it, in a yellow envelope spotted with age, I found something I wasn't looking for. An acceptance letter from Sinclair Community College School of Nursing, dated September 1985. Addressed to Janet Marie Callahan, my mother's maiden name. Below it, a tuition receipt for the first semester, $600, marked paid. And beneath that, a handwritten note on lined paper, the ink faded brown. Your brother needs the money more. You'll be married soon enough. Don't be difficult. The handwriting slanted to the right, heavy pressed, confident. It looked like my father's handwriting. It wasn't. It was my mother's father's, but the penmanship was close enough to make my stomach drop. I held that letter in the attic heat, dust floating in the light from the small window. My mother had been accepted to nursing school at 19. Her parents pulled the funding for her brother. She never went back. 40 years later, she sat at a kitchen table and nodded while her husband did the same thing to her daughter. I put the letter back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in the box. I closed the box and returned it to its spot between Christmas ornaments and Kyle's school papers. I folded the attic ladder up and locked the ceiling panel. I took my birth certificate, locked the front door, and drove away. On the highway back to Cleveland, I thought about my mother at 19. Janet Callahan, accepted into nursing school, $600 paid, ready to start, until her father decided her brother's future was worth more. She married Frank Mercer 2 years later. She never went back to school. She raised 2 kids, kept a spotless house, and defended the system that had crushed her own ambition, because admitting it was wrong would mean admitting she'd lost 40 years to a lie. I understood her then. Not forgave. Understood. When I told her I wanted to go to college and she nodded along with my father's speech about a woman's place, she wasn't choosing Frank's side. She was choosing her own survival. If my dreams were valid, then hers had been stolen. If a daughter could do what she couldn't, then everything Janet had told herself about her life, that it was enough, that it was the right choice, that she was happy, would disintegrate. She couldn't afford that. So she enforced the same pattern, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation.